Good morning, Art History 1. I hope you are doing fantastically well. Greetings again from the other side of the world. This is actually Mesopotamia, the second part of our lecture, and today we are in front of the Ishtar Gate here in Mesopotamia, one of the most impressive, beautiful kind of figures that we actually have. There are a number of gates around Babylon, and this one happens to be the Ishtar Gate, dedicated to that lovely goddess Ishtar, the goddess of beauty, the goddess of love, and the goddess of wisdom and war. Very similar to some of the features that we're going to see later on in the Greek culture of Athena. Today, we're going to kick it right off with the first book ever written in human history, at least what we have found so far, called the Epic of Gilgamesh. There may be something that is earlier that's buried underneath the sands in Iraq or Mesopotamia, but we just have not found any of those things that actually show up yet. And so let's get started. I'm going to share our screen. Now, what's amazing about the Epic of Gilgamesh, besides it being the first story in our human history, is all the different issues that it actually deals with. It deals with the aspects of religion. It deals with eternal love, afterlife, heroism, friendship, the belief in the pursuit of philosophy of bettering yourself within the process. And so here's a great video that deals with the introductory concept behind that.
Hi, I'm Mike Rignetta. This is Crash Course Mythology, and today we're returning to one of the world's favorite texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is one of the oldest written stories in the world, and it's a great illustration of Joseph Campbell's monomythic hero's journey introduced last episode. Plus, it has sacred trees, love-struck goddesses, and a fearsome demon named Humbaba. To Sumeria. The Epic of Gilgamesh is more than 4,000 years old. Written versions of the story date back to 2100 BCE, which gives it incredible historical value. For instance, several versions of the Gilgamesh story use both Sumerian and Akkadian names for gods, which shows how the story might have passed orally between the cultures of ancient Mesopotamia. This could also be considered syncretism, when two religious traditions combine over time. In this episode, we're going to work from a version of the epic written around 1200 BCE and see how Gilgamesh himself fits into the hero's journey. A fair bit of warning, though, in this story there is a brief mention of rape. At the start of our tale, Gilgamesh is the king of Uruk, and he's both a bad guy and a bad king. His subjects are unhappy, he disrespects the gods, and he's a serial rapist. So basically, he's the opposite of a hero. But Gilgamesh, like many heroes, has divine parentage, a goddess mom and a human king dad. Somehow this makes him 2/3 god and 1/3 man. Try not to think too hard about the math on that one, but either way, he's still mortal, and that's hard for him to accept. Eventually, Gilgamesh has a number of crazy adventures. He chops down some famous trees and meets his best friend Enkidu, who helps Gilgamesh become a better man and a better king. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh goes to the underworld to try to bring him back. He fails, however, and then must admit that he's human after all. In the end, Gilgamesh is considered a hero, not just for his incredible deeds, but for coming to understand and accept his true nature. But okay, let's backtrack, because along the way, Gilgamesh manages to check off nearly every single heroic scene that we learned about in the last episode. We're going to count them up one by one, play along from home. Every time you see a heroic scene, shout it out. But I'm pretty far away, so just make sure that you shout like really, really loudly. So things get started in the epic when Gilgamesh and Enkidu first meet. Right away, they decide to wrestle each other, and realizing that they're evenly matched, they reach a stalemate. This is a heroic trope in its own right, just not one of Campbell's. Think Robin Hood and Little John, Arthur and Lancelot, or Vin Diesel and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in Fast Five. After dusting themselves off and becoming BFFs, Gilgamesh and Enkidu return to Uruk to do kingly stuff. But Enkidu, who's used to living in the wilderness, he gets bored. Gilgamesh proposes that they head to the forest and face off against a terrifying demon adversary, Humbaba. Yeah, it's not a very threatening name, I know, but trust me, it's a big deal, very terrifying. But did you see what happened? This is what Campbell would call the announcement of the quest. To prep for the journey, Gilgamesh and Enkidu get supernatural aid in the form of some special weaponry. Then they have a quick refusal of the quest as Enkidu, who knows the power of Humbaba, tries to warn Gilgamesh. Humbaba, whose shout is the flood weapon, whose utterance is fire, and whose breath is death, can hear for a distance of 60 leagues through the forest. So who can penetrate his forest? Debility would seize anyone who penetrated his forest. But Gilgamesh persists. Gilgamesh and Enkidu meet the goddess, Gilgamesh's mom, Ninsun. She's not particularly happy with her son's plan, but she blesses Gilgamesh and adopts Enkidu. In the forest, Enkidu warns Gilgamesh about its gates, saying how afraid he is to cross the threshold. But once again, Gilgamesh persists, and the two venture forth into the darkness of the forest, now deep in the belly of the whale. And we're going to follow them right in. Thought bubble? Take us in there. Creeping through the pine forest, Enkidu and Gilgamesh prepare to confront Humbaba. Before long, the earth shakes and the sky goes dark. Humbaba is upon them. Humbaba is massive, with the face of a lion, or scales, or vulture feet, or a snake tail, depending upon which version you read. But nonetheless, very fearsome. Undeterred, Gilgamesh and Enkidu leap into battle. With supernatural aid from the god Shamash and some divine winds that bind Humbaba, Gilgamesh slays the demon and removes its head. If you're keeping score at home, this step is technically atonement with the father. Humbaba can be read as a terrible, overbearing father figure that must be, well, not so much atoned with as, beheaded. After the glorious battle, Gilgamesh and Enkidu fell a bunch of sacred trees, build a raft, and sail home with Humbaba's noggin. Once home, Gilgamesh takes a bath and puts on some royal robes in anticipation of his meeting with a goddess. In this case, the goddess is Ishtar, who definitely has a thing for Gilgamesh. She says, "Come to me, Gilgamesh, and be my lover. Bestow upon me the gift of your fruit. You can be my husband, and I can be your wife." Gilgamesh refuses Ishtar's advances, though. Maybe he just wasn't ready to share his fruit, which makes this scene woman as temptress. Insulted, Ishtar sends the bull of heaven to kill Gilgamesh, who, with Enkidu, kills the bull. But Enkidu, who just does not know when to quit, slaps Ishtar with a chunk of said bull. Not smart, friendo. With that beefy slap, Enkidu seals his fate. The life drains from his body, he gets sicker and sicker, and dies. Thank you, Thought Bubble. With Enkidu dead, Gilgamesh is at a turning point. He thought he'd finished his hero's journey. After traveling to the ends of the earth, defeating his dad, and returning home with a gross, bloody trophy, he put on robes. He was done. But now, with the loss of his best friend, Gilgamesh feels yet another call to adventure. So he leaves Uruk to roam the country, wondering, shall I die too? Am I not like Enkidu? Grief has entered my innermost being. I am afraid of death, and so I roam open country. Gilgamesh is on another heroic quest, this time to overcome death and live eternally. He resolves to find Utnapishtim, who you might remember from a previous episode. He's the dude who was granted immortality after surviving the Great Flood. Along the way, Gilgamesh crosses the mountains that guard the rising and setting sun and confronts monstrous scorpion men. Crossing the mountains means another crossing the threshold, and crossing this threshold means Gilgamesh is in the belly of yet another whale, walking through 10 leagues of darkness. Eventually, stumbling through the dark, Gilgamesh has another meeting with the goddess. This time it's Siduri, the goddess of beer and wisdom, two things that don't often go together. Siduri tells Gilgamesh that to meet Utnapishtim, Gilgamesh must cross lethal waters with the boatman Ur-Shanabi. Gilgamesh thanks Siduri for the beer, sets off, and finds Ur-Shanabi. Immediately, Gilgamesh bashes Ur-Shanabi over the head, that seems very, very rude. I mean, why would Gilgamesh treat Ur-Shanabi so Ur-Shambly? Anyways, I suppose maybe clobbering is the only way that Gilgamesh knows how to communicate with people who aren't goddesses. In addition to bashing Ur-Shanabi over the head, Gilgamesh smashes all of the things of stone, which is unfortunate because it turns out that those things of stone are the tools Ur-Shanabi needs to cross the water. So Gilgamesh has yet another task. He must cut down trees to make punting poles. Finally, Ur-Shanabi shows Gilgamesh how to use the poles to cross the lethal waters and reach Utnapishtim. But when he does, Gilgamesh can't exactly celebrate. Utnapishtim challenges him. He asks, "Why have you exerted yourself? What have you achieved? You have made yourself weary for lack of sleep. You only fill your flesh with grief. You only bring the distant days of reckoning closer. Mankind's fame is cut down like reeds in a reed bed. Nobody sees the face of death. Nobody hears the voice of death. Savage death just cuts mankind down." This isn't exactly the answer Gilgamesh was hoping for. Is Utnapishtim just going to turn him away? Is he doomed to remain mortal? Gilgamesh persists, so Utnapishtim tells him his own story about the flood being chosen by Ea, the gods granting him immortality. And this is a revelation to Gilgamesh, the truth of immortality, and it serves as his apotheosis. Utnapishtim decides Gilgamesh really wants to be immortal. Fine. But to prove his worth, he has to complete a road of trials with just one simple task. Gilgamesh must stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. "No problem," Gilgamesh says. "Easy," he snorts. He plops down on a rock, and having walked into the darkness for over 10 leagues, instantly falls asleep. Whoops. Even though Gilgamesh failed his test, Utnapishtim gives him an out. If he really wants to avoid death, there's a secret plant, a root like a camel thorn. If he can track it down, it'll bring him great rejuvenation. This will be his ultimate boon. So, does Gilgamesh get his magic plant? Yes and no. He manages to find it growing deep underwater, and by tying stones to his feet, manages to sink down, snip a sample, and float back up to the surface. After this, he sets off for his great return to civilization. But after all that, on his way home, boon in hand, Gilgamesh decides that he should stop and take a bath. While he's soaking, a snake slithers up, sneaks behind him, curls around the plant, and disappears. As he towels himself off, he sees the plant is gone and is just defeated. He sits down and weeps. Gilgamesh must return home empty-handed. So, what is heroism? Gilgamesh is a mighty warrior who stands up to terrible monsters and discovers the secret of immortality, but who ultimately fails in his quest. Over the course of the story, he has almost all the experiences set forth in Campbell's monomyth, sometimes more than once. But is this what makes him a hero? Really, Gilgamesh is kind of an ambivalent figure. His journey has many successes, but also many failures. His bravery, or lack of respect, allows him to challenge and kill Humbaba, but also gets Enkidu killed. He proudly announces that he's up to Utnapishtim's challenge, but he simply isn't. At the end of the epic, Gilgamesh comes to terms with his limitations as a human. This completes the journey, achieving the final crucial step, having the power and wisdom to live a good life. Not an eternal life, but a good one. In Gilgamesh's case, that means one where you aren't a terrible king. Ava Thury and Margaret Davini sum up Gilgamesh's heroism pretty well. Gilgamesh wants to escape human limitations, to get answers to questions not available to his contemporaries, and perhaps most importantly, he wants to overcome mortality, both for himself and others. But ultimately, his story shows us that despite his extraordinary talents, in these matters he is not different from other humans. Thus, we see that it is precisely his human limitations that make him truly heroic. So, is he perfect? No. Is he even a role model? Definitely not. But can he serve as a symbol for an aspect of the human condition, of growing past mistakes and accepting limitations? Maybe. And perhaps that is what makes him a hero. Next week, we'll see just how many heroes might be lurking where you're not expecting them. Oh, and also, we're going to talk about an army of flying monkeys that I may or may not call my bridgies. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Check out our Crash Course Mythology tote bag, and poster, available now at dftba.com. Crash Course Mythology, hi.
What I really like about this particular video is that it does go through the major issues that show up within Gilgamesh. it lays out that there are real philosophical concerns that once we develop civilization and we have enough food through agriculture, we start expressing and trying to figure out what is afterlife actually like. We don't see anything along those lines before we develop writing, or do we have a way of transmitting that knowledge even if we were thinking about it beforehand? It asks about conversations on love. What does love actually mean? About sexual attraction, about the importance of kind of male bonding within the process with Enkidu and Gilgamesh, about the idea of searching out to make yourself better. And so all these things are going to show up. And it's pretty remarkable that this is from a number of clay tablets, most number around 7 clay tablets that would have weighed 700 pounds. So imagine checking that out in your local library. Almost none of the editions, actually none of the editions is complete. And so even in your reading, you'll note there's some asterisk marks that are marked up. Those are words that we just don't have in any text. So we still have a couple lines of, basically comes down to about 42 to 45 pages, depending on the size of the print, how small it is or how large it is. We still have certain portions of this that have not been found. So archaeologists in the Middle East, particularly in Iraq, when they are excavating and looking for libraries, they are looking for more copies of this that shows up. Now, one of the questions I would ask in class, and we did probably ask in class, is why would this story make a summer blockbuster movie? Remember, summer blockbuster movies are big scale, big budget. Transformers, Harry Potter, Star Wars, The Avengers. They're huge. And so what are some of the features that would make this a particularly good blockbuster movie? Because it is a blockbuster movie that's headed your way. They're currently working on this film already. And before we leave then the Epic of Gilgamesh, I want you to have an idea of what it would sound like. Besides reading it and checking out the 700-pound version on clay tablets that were wet clay that would be impressed with different cylinder scrolls or different seals, it would also be an oral epic that would have been played by an individual known as a bard, someone who plays a particular musical instrument and sings the song at the same time. The world-renowned scholar Peter Pringle, who we heard last week playing the bull lyre, is playing the opening of Gilgamesh here. So you can hear what it would have sounded like in the original Sumerian language. And note, the opening of this is very similar to the book of Genesis, the separation of the heaven, of the earth, the separation, or then the creation of mankind. And note the images that you have. Right behind me right now is the image of Ishtar. Beneath me is the image of Gilgamesh as that great king. And he claims his heritage all the way back to Hammurabi. And over on the right is an image of Enkidu, the wild man with horns, along with Gilgamesh. And so that is the opening that you actually just listened to on the Gushgudi, that actually played by Peter Pringle of the Epic of Gilgamesh. One of the things that shows up is there are variations of Ishtar. Note, we have very different images of Ishtar. Right above me, we have ones that are basically a combination of some of the prehistoric features that lead us literally into the Mesopotamian feature. We get the columnar body, some are larger weight, so we see the transition between some of them. But note, all the way up in the left-hand corner, that is the model of Ishtar that's the most common one, this beautiful kind of sexual being, starting to see a little bit of the curves that really are going to get emphasized in ancient Egypt and in specifically in ancient Greek when we get there in a couple of weeks with the Aphrodite of Cnidus, which really does canonize the female curvilinear, beautiful body that we see with kind of the hourglass shape. This is that first start approach coming out of prehistoric art and the melting of the ice ages. One of the things that shows up is Ishtar is the goddess of love. She's the goddess of beauty, but also of wisdom and war. And so when Gilgamesh is asked by Ishtar if she wants to be her lover, remember, this is the most beautiful woman in the world, the most beautiful goddess in the world. Every day she can look like whoever you wanted her to look like. She can transform herself. So in the modern day world, one day she can be Beyonce. The next day she could be a Playboy model or a Maxim model. The next day after that, she could be Scarlett Johansson, or she could be anyone that you think is the most desirable woman on the planet for whatever your particular interests are. And she can transform into that. Gilgamesh is offered a loving relationship with this woman, and Gilgamesh says no, which challenges all sorts of issues. First off, Gilgamesh rejects a god, a goddess. The goddess gets upset, and her anger comes down, and she sends the bull of heaven. He kills the bull of heaven, which starts this entire process of Enkidu enraging and dying. And so we have a huge kind of circular story setting up within the process. If Gilgamesh had just said yes, like any 18 or 19-year-old man probably would, I mean, imagine the most beautiful woman in the world, famous, wealth, gorgeous, offering you a purely sexual kind of loving relationship. Almost every guy in America or in the world would take up on that relationship. And so one of the things that shows up is Gilgamesh says no. The question we have to ask is why? The reason why? Gilgamesh wanted eternal love. As much as it contradicts what we think about men in the modern day world being players, thinking about sex all the time, in this world it was Ishtar. Ishtar could go to anyone she wants. She was impressed and really was fantasizing about Gilgamesh, who then rejects her. Now, the problem for Gilgamesh is Gilgamesh knows her history. Gilgamesh is going to age. He is only, he's not fully God. He's not fully human. He's 2/3 God, 1/3 man. So he's going to age. And in 10 years, he's not going to be as desirable or desirable at all to Ishtar. She's going to move on. And he wants eternal love in a female relationship, very much the same way that he wants that eternal love with his best friend Enkidu in a purely platonic, brotherly love kind of relationship. And so that's what we're looking at. Now, Ishtar, after the 10 years of absolute passion and love, she would turn Gilgamesh into some creature and move on to the next. So that might be a scorpion you get turned into, could be a worm, could be a salamander, anything from this particular area of the world. And so that's what Gilgamesh was. Excuse me. And that's what Gilgamesh wants, that eternal love. Now, one of the things that shows up is once we start getting writing, we start getting jokes. And some of the jokes are funny or not. The first joke in world history is actually beneath us, at least that we've found so far, from 1900 BCE. And it starts with farts. Fart jokes, I guess, were funny back then for 12-year-old boys like they are today. You can see it's actually, if you look right above me, it's actually written right above me in cuneiform script. Something which has never occurred since time began. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. Don't know why it's funny. Some people must find it funny. And so the average person over here, the average person farts 13 times a day, asking you if you're above average. And on the right-hand side, never trust a girl who doesn't fart. Hard telling what else she's holding back from you. So fart jokes, even in the modern day world, seem to be funny, at least if you're a 12-year-old boy. The jokes don't get any better, but they do get more interesting. So the first yo mama joke, making fun of someone's mama, from 1500 BCE. Here it is below. Your mama is so ugly, the only thing that would have intercourse with her is a, and it's left blank. We don't have an answer. And that's because if you look at this scroll over here, where my cursor is, see that? That's where the punchline would be. It's been either chiseled out or broken. Very weird, strange. We have the world's first customer complaint over here, talking about how bad the service and the food is at a particular restaurant, and does not name the restaurant. Not that we could go there and find it. I'm sure it doesn't exist today. It's 3,000 years old or 2,500 years old. And here's how cuneiform actually developed over time, going from the ancient character all the way up through Akkadian and then Babylonian. You can see how similar the different languages are. So they're almost like a dialects that shows up. So in this artwork, and I'll remind you, you had a reading about this particular artwork. What is important about this artwork? Mesopotamian art firsts. This is called the Naramsin Victory Stela. Note stela, still that word for upright stone, like the Stela of Hammurabi. That's all it means, is upright slab of stone. Any idea? Anyone remember what this particular artwork is about? That is correct. It's the world's first war monument. Once we actually win war and have civilization, and note the triangular composition that's starting to develop here with our leader all the way up on the top, Naramsin, we start creating that triangular composition in the tomb of the Iwo Jima Memorial and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. We start actually celebrating our victories, our monuments in war, but also the loss of our own dead who actually sacrificed so much. We see this for almost every war we go into. It all started here with the Naramsin Victory Stela. And the other thing that's new and innovative from this time period is the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, the 7 wonders of the world were originally created by the Greeks, and they wanted to celebrate how awesome their culture was once we established the Greek world and the Greek Empire, the Greek kind of dynasty of city-states that starts in about 2 weeks for us, about 1,000 years after the fall of Mesopotamia, because we have the Egyptian group going in at the same time period. One of the amazing things, remember, these individuals, they live in a desert climate. So that's the climate they have to irrigate in order to make the invention of gardening with the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, with the 7 wonders of the world, the Greeks actually put 5 in their own world to show how awesome they are. But they give a shout out, one to the Mesopotamians, specifically to Babylon, for the Hanging Gardens, for creating these beautiful, wonderful smelling gardens in the middle of a desert environment with irrigation and plants. The other one they're going to give us a shout out is, as you can guess, is the Egyptians for the Great Pyramids of Giza, the only 7 wonder of the world that's still remaining today. So I guess the Egyptians win. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, what is amazing about it is they basically serve 3 different functions. And they really do continue on today in almost all garden architecture or garden kind of planning that we have, even into the modern day world. The idea of the English garden, the French garden, they all come out of this. Gardens serve 3 purposes. Number 1, they work for sense, right? These cities, often with open sewers, oftentimes smelled. They did not have a way of removing most of their waste. The water was pretty disgusting and pretty dirty. When they did have water, they would pee in pots, throw them out the windows, or have it collected and transported somewhere else, depending upon which city, state, and Mesopotamia we're looking at. So these places are going to stink. They also didn't involve deodorant, and so women and men actually, but more women would actually wear flowers around their body as deodorant, and the essence of the oils would be rubbed into their body. This is a wedding tradition that actually continued all the way until Botticelli will actually have an image of this later on in La Primavera, where women used to actually hide beautiful smelling flowers on their body because they hadn't developed deodorant. So when a man unwrapped a woman on her wedding night or on their wedding night, he would find these beautiful, lovely smelling flowers in different parts of her body that would give her body an aromatic smell rather than that heavy, body odor of being out in the heat with so many wrappings of clothes that show up. So one is going to be the essence of smell or scent. The second one, it's for the idea of spices. Food back then was rather terrible because there's not a lot of spices. There's not a lot of pepper. There's not a salt was basically more valuable than almost anything else, including gold. In fact, the word salary comes actually from the word salt, because salt was used to cure meat and make things actually last longer. And it was a pretty limited commodity that they had, at least the salt that they could use to actually cure meat and make things last for a longer time. So salary comes from that. Now, one of the things that shows up is that later on with Columbus, all the way in 1492, almost 2,000 years later, when he sets out to explore the New World, he gets funding because he's looking for spices, right? He's trying to find the spice islands, away to India and the other spice islands, because they're still looking at trying to flavor their food. So another way was actually basing have these herb gardens that show up. And the third is just fun for the wealthy to be able to walk around and have this pleasure garden that's kind of potentially a symbol of the underworld or the afterworld, or something just pleasurable for that they would have on their own. Wealthy people, poor people were generally not allowed into these gardens at all. They were for the very upper nobility, kings, queens, and priests. So as we end our understanding of Mesopotamia today and where we've come from, the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, Fertile Crescent, ancient Iraq, or any of those kind of names that you want to do, Akkad, Babylonia, Sumeria, they're all correct dealing with different aspects here. We want to know if you can actually identify some of the ways that these ancient civilizations have impacted our world today. Can you do this in 10 minutes? The other game we're going to play in class is we're going to challenge you A to Z. This is based upon a bias, where we want you to think of an artwork, a personality, an invention, or an aesthetic from each letter of the alphabet about Mesopotamia. For example, if C came up, you could use composite pose. If N came up, you could use Neram's and Stella, or it also could be narrative register that shows up with how they told their stories, like we see with the bull lyre. And so can we get all the letters? It's always difficult to try and find the X's, the Y's, and the Z's. And luckily for this culture, you got a Z that's pretty readily handy from Mesopotamia. So that'd be the other thing. And finally, to leave us, even Bugs Bunny has actually gone and discovered the world of Mesopotamia. So here is the video where Bugs Bunny discovers Mesopotamia.
Discover the world of Bugs Bunny. That's me, seatbelt stop. What happens to land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Middle East? West by me. Before Southern Iraq was Southern Iran, it was Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, where man first became civilized.
Well, what did you know?
6,000 years ago, they invented the clan of writing, built the first cities, made laws, even studied the stars, and built over wheels. These people studied the land and are still making history today. Discover more at your library.
And so as you think about the finale and everything that is going on, if you think about the finale and everything that's going on in Mesopotamia, think about how enriched this was from an older civilization to the modern day world, but also the impact it has today. Now, many of you in terms of the modern day world might know of the Iran deal that actually showed up, and there are implications for Mesopotamia on that Iran deal that President Obama signed off on, and President Trump has actually revoked, leading us to more of a conflictual relationship with Iran right now, potentially enriching uranium and moving closer to nuclear warheads within the process. President Obama was trying to stop that. President Trump is trying to stop that in a different format. And the reason is this: many people say that the deal that we got with Iran for the Iran deal was a terrible deal. And that is because if you think about it, we're arguing two different things. From the Iranian perspective and the Iraqi perspective within this, they are arguing this. They are arguing the fact that they have created and did create one of the greatest human civilizations ever, that they are one of the world's superpower. They may very well be the most important human civilization that has ever existed. Right? When we look at overall impact that they have on all other culture, from writing, agriculture, literature, taxes, it is really remarkable what this one civilization has done. And so when Iran and the area and the other countries in this area for that are the Fertile Crescent come in and they argue and they're actually debating and coming up with kind of plans on where they fit, they're arguing from a historical standpoint. The United States, we're not arguing that. The United States, we are arguing that we have the biggest, baddest, best military on the planet, and that we can basically take over and compel, force our will on others. Those are two conversations which generally just don't hold up in any way, shape, or form. So we run to a major issue as we're looking at this, trying to figure out, all right, how do we solve world politics and world issues? There's not really a good way of compromising along these two lines because we generally are arguing from two very different perspectives. That coupled with the fact that this is an area that still controls the hydrocarbon flow with oil as we move hopefully more and more towards green energy with global climatic change taking place. But for right now, this is the center of the oil industry in the absolute world. And not everyone, particularly most of our friends from NATO, many of the Asian nations, China, Japan, look at Thailand, don't have their own control over oil. So they need the oil from this area. And number three, with climatic change, this major area is getting drier and drier. The water is drying up even more so. More of the area is becoming sandy in terms of a desert, or in terms of what's called a Sahel region, which is getting semi-arid, closer to a desert. There's not enough water. Those people, as the population increases, are going to have to move somewhere else. Probably millions of them if we don't figure out the water resources in the next 50 years. And so the United Nations is currently predicting 30 million, whether they're Arab or other Muslims within the area, are going to have to move out of that area. There's not enough water to support that population. So how will we handle this? So this is going to be a quagmire, an issue, an area of the world that is a hotbed over the next generation. So it's good to know something about the historical ramifications and what the implications are as this group of individuals from all over this area, and there are multiple different ethnicities and backgrounds, have to move into other portions of the modern day world. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and I hope everything is well. See you in class.